All right, so how are we going to use these summary statistics? Let's say we have two students, and student 1 has a mean of 85 on their tests, and they have a standard deviation of 8. And student 2 has a mean of 81 and a standard deviation of 10. Which student performed better on the exams? Well, if you better indicates a higher typical value on the exams, and our measure of a typical value is the mean. So to answer this question, you would want to focus on which student had the higher mean, and you would say, oh, student 1 had a mean of 85, had a higher mean score. That would be the proper way to evaluate that. Which student has more dispersion in their scores? Well, if you're asked a question on dispersion, you want to focus on a measure of dispersion. And in this case, the most dispersion would be student 2 because it had a standard deviation. He had a standard deviation of 10, which is higher. So to summarize, you want to know better, worse, that's typical value, that's mean or median. Which student has more dispersion? You look at standard deviation. Let's take this example. In my undergraduate class, typically I have a quiz and a test. Now the quiz has 25 points. The test has 100 points. Now on the quiz, the average score was 20 and the standard deviation was 5. And on the test, the average score was 80 and the standard deviation was 15. So let's ask the same two questions. On which of these assessments did students perform better? Pause the video and think about that. Now, many of you probably deduced that even though 80 is higher than 20, there were more points to be able to be gotten here. So what a lot of you instinctively did was you said, well, 20 divided by 25 is 80%. And 80 divided by 100 is 80%. So instinctively, you kind of knew it wasn't fair to compare the gross number 80 with the gross number 20. And you changed it to a percentage. Now let me ask you the same question. In which of these is there more dispersion? I know this group, the test has a standard deviation of 15, the quiz 5. However, if it's not fair to compare 80 to 20, it's not fair to compare 15 to 5. One way we can compare the variation of groups with very different means is by computing something known as the coefficient of variation. And the coefficient of variation is simply turning the variation into a percentage of the mean. Take the standard deviation and divide it by the mean. So for example, on the quiz, we had 5 out of 20, 5 standard deviation of 20, which is 25%. On the test, we had 15 out of 80, which is 18.75%. Now, whichever of these two numbers is larger is the one that has more dispersion. And in this case, the group that has more dispersion is the coefficient of variation for quiz. So I would conclude that the quiz had more variation because it had a higher coefficient of variation. Okay.